February 14, 1943, deep in the Belarusian forests. Winter had tightened its grip over the dense forests of Belarus. Snow lay thick and heavy on every branch and bough, muffling the usual sounds of wildlife, leaving only the crunch of boots, the faint whistle of the wind, and the occasional distant howl of a wolf. For the Soviet scouts of the Red Army's First Belarusian Front, these forests were both a battleground and a labyrinth, where hidden dangers lurked behind every tree, enemy patrols, mines, and the ever-present threat of frostbite. Every step carried risk, every sound could betray a soldier's presence. Lieutenant Ivan Petrov, a seasoned officer with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind, led a small reconnaissance unit through a narrow ravine, where snow had drifted into mounds taller than some of the men. His scouts, 6 in number, were young but experienced, chosen for their skill in stealth and survival in hostile terrain. Their mission was critical: locate any signs of German supply movements in the forest and report them back to headquarters. Intelligence had hinted at suspicious train activity, but until today, no one had ever confirmed its existence. Peering over a ridge, Private Dmitry Sokolov, the youngest of the group, froze. His gloved hand shook slightly as he raised his finger. "Comrade Lieutenant, tracks," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the winter wind. Petrov squinted through binoculars and saw the faint outline of railway lines, partially buried in snow, twisting through the trees like a serpent. Some segments were old and weathered, almost forgotten, but other stretches gleamed in the pale sun, freshly used. The timber was crisp, the rails almost new. Petrov held a hand up for silence. The scouts froze, listening. The forest seemed unnaturally still, as if holding its breath. Even the wind had softened. Every rustle, every snapping branch could signal danger, or discovery. The tracks curved around a bend, disappearing behind a thicket of pine trees. Petrov motioned for 2 of his men to flank left, while another pair took the right. He and Dmitri would advance cautiously in the center. The forest closed in around them, thick with snow-laden branches. Each step was calculated, their breaths forming clouds that mingled with the mist. Minutes later, they crested a small rise. The sight that greeted them made them all pause, eyes wide and unblinking. Hidden among the pines, partially camouflaged by tarps and snow, lay a massive Nazi supply train. Its engines were cold, smoke absent, but the sheer scale of the convoy was staggering. Boxcars, armored cars, and flatbeds stretched across the forest floor, some partially obscured by trees, others clearly visible. Petrov crouched lower, whispering urgently to his men. "This isn't ordinary, orders from headquarters were vague, but this is important. We need to see what's inside." Quietly, the scouts exchanged tense glances. One armored car had its hatch slightly open. Dmitri, curiosity and fear warring in his expression, crept forward and peeked inside. He expected rifles, ammunition, maybe artillery shells. What he saw instead made him freeze. Rows of crates filled the interior, tightly packed and labeled with symbols most of the scouts did not recognize. Some bore strange markings, others ominous biohazard-style symbols. Thick glass panels on several crates revealed shapes moving inside, shapes that writhed and shifted, though not like animals or humans they had seen before. Petrov raised binoculars. The sight made his chest tighten. A faint mechanical hiss came from one of the armored cars, low and metallic. The scouts froze, barely breathing. The forest seemed to close in around them, shadows lengthening as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Every movement carried risk, every glance could reveal them. Whatever was inside these crates was alive, but it was not ordinary. The Nazis had gone to extreme lengths to hide it, and for good reason. Petrov's mind raced. Could this be chemical weapons? Experimental equipment? Or something even more sinister? One thing was certain: this train was pivotal, a secret that could change the outcome of the front if it fell into the wrong hands. As the scouts adjusted their positions, moving silently through the snow and debris, the forest around them seemed alive with anticipation. Each pine tree, each drift of snow, became a potential threat. Shadows danced under the low sun, creating illusions of movement. The tension was unbearable, yet every man knew the importance of the mission. They were the eyes of the Red Army behind enemy lines, and discovery would be their only ticket to survival. Dmitri finally whispered, his voice barely audible. "Comrade Lieutenant, should we try to open one?" Petrov shook his head slowly, his eyes never leaving the crates. "Not yet. We gather intelligence first. Observe. Report. Do not touch. Whatever this is, it could kill us before the Germans even know we're here." Night began to fall. Shadows stretched across the snow-covered forest floor, blending the train into the surrounding pines. The soldiers felt a cold wind cut through their coats, chilling them to the bone. Yet they could not move, could not leave. They had stumbled upon something extraordinary, something dangerous. The forest had revealed a secret few had seen, and few would survive if it was discovered before they could report it. Petrov motioned for his men to settle in for observation. "We've found it. Now, we learn what they're hiding. Quietly. Carefully. And we survive." As darkness fell, the forest seemed to pulse with hidden life. Somewhere within the camouflage tarps, the crates shifted. Something inside was moving. And for the first time, Petrov felt a shiver of true fear, not from the snow, the trees, or the Germans, but from whatever the Nazis were transporting in the heart of the forest. Nightfall crept across the snow-laden Ardennes-like forest, turning the world into a monochrome of shadows and white. The Soviet scouts had settled behind a ridge overlooking the Nazi train, but rest was impossible. Every creak of timber, every whisper of wind through the pines made their nerves taut as bowstrings. Lieutenant Ivan Petrov's breath formed clouds in the frigid air, his sharp eyes tracing every movement in the hidden convoy below. Private Dmitri Sokolov's hands trembled, his fingers brushing against the cold steel of his Mosin Nagant. He had peeked at the crates earlier, and the sight haunted him. Shapes inside the armored cars writhed, strange and unnatural. "Lieutenant," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I've never seen anything like this. They're alive, aren't they?" Petrov's eyes narrowed. "Stay calm. Observe first. Understand what we are dealing with. This is not a normal supply train. If we make a mistake, we will die before the Germans know we exist." The scouts began moving closer, using the trees as cover. Snow muffled their boots, but not entirely. They dropped to their stomachs, crawling where necessary, inching through drifts taller than their chests. Each step brought them closer to the train, and deeper into danger. As they reached the edge of the line, Petrov raised a hand. The scouts froze. In the dim light, a shadow shifted near one of the flatbeds. A German sentry had emerged from behind a stack of crates, pacing slowly. The scouts held their breath, hearts hammering. Dmitri's pulse raced. Even the cold felt like fire against his skin. Petrov gestured for silence. "Do not fire. Do not move. Wait for him to turn." The sentry continued his patrol, rifle slung casually over his shoulder, unaware of the eyes watching him from the snow. After several tense minutes, he moved away. The scouts exhaled silently, and Petrov motioned for them to continue. They reached the edge of the train cars, flattening themselves behind snow-dusted crates. The armored car hatch was now fully visible. Petrov crawled closer, careful to avoid loose snow that could betray their presence. He peered inside. What he saw made him freeze. The crates were indeed alive, but not in any way a human or animal would be. Thin, pale shapes moved erratically behind thick glass, their forms twisting unnaturally, limbs elongated or bent in impossible ways. Some emitted faint, guttural sounds, almost mechanical yet organic. Petrov's mind raced. The Germans were conducting experiments, biological, chemical, or worse. They were hiding something so dangerous that it could change the war if released. He motioned for Dmitri to look through the binoculars. "Do you see it?" he whispered. Dmitri's eyes widened in horror. The shapes inside the crates writhed as if in pain, or perhaps rage. The scouts could not tell whether they were alive, engineered, or something entirely different. Suddenly, a metallic clank echoed from the far side of the train. Petrov stiffened. He raised his hand. Another patrol? Or someone coming to check the cargo? The forest seemed to hold its breath. The scouts froze like statues in the snow, every muscle taut. The shadow moved. One of the Nazis was inspecting the flatbeds. Petrov counted silently. At least 2 more soldiers had emerged from the tree line, rifles ready, moving with disciplined precision. Petrov weighed their options. They were deep in enemy territory. One misstep, one snapping branch, and it would be over. Yet the intelligence they could gather tonight could save hundreds of lives if reported back to command. "We split," he whispered. 2 go around to the rear. Observe. 2 stay with me. Everyone else watches our flanks. Dmitri, you're with me." The scouts obeyed, slipping silently through the snow. Each step became more treacherous. Petrov's mind replayed the reports they had received about secret German research, rumors of advanced weapons, biochemical projects, and experiments hidden from the front lines. Could this be it? Could these crates contain the very horrors whispered about in secret briefings? As they moved around the train, Petrov noticed strange devices on the flatbeds: metallic cylinders, sealed containers with unknown liquids, and more crates marked with symbols that sent shivers down his spine. The Germans had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide this cargo. Clearly, it was valuable, deadly, and terrifying. The scouts reached the rear of the train. One crate's glass panel revealed movement more pronounced than before, a pale, twisted shape, writhing violently, its outline almost humanoid but grotesque. Petrov took a step back, fighting a rising sense of dread. "We cannot touch it," he whispered. "Observe. Document. Survive." Suddenly, a sound, a subtle scraping of metal against metal, echoed through the forest. One of the crates shifted, sliding slightly as if reacting to their presence. Dmitri swallowed hard, fear flashing across his face. The forest seemed to close in around them. Petrov motioned for silence and signaled for the scouts to continue observing, their breath forming clouds in the freezing air. "We take note. We leave nothing behind. And we get out alive," he said. But even as he spoke, a chill ran down his spine. The cargo, the Nazi's secret, was alive, intelligent, or both. It was dangerous, and it was awake. Night deepened, and the forest became darker, almost suffocating in its stillness. Petrov and his scouts huddled near the train, recording every detail in memory and on paper. Each second increased the risk of detection, but the urgency of the mission pressed them forward. The longer they stayed, the more they realized the train was not just a supply convoy. It was a mobile laboratory, a hidden weapon, and potentially a key to understanding the Nazis' darkest experiments. Hours passed. The scouts noted the armored cars, the crates, and the eerie movement inside the glass panels. The shapes writhed in ways that were unnatural, horrifying, and entirely alien to anything the Red Army had encountered. Petrov could not shake the feeling that the Germans had created something monstrous, something capable of changing the battlefield in ways no ordinary weapon could. Finally, as the first pale light of dawn began to touch the snow-covered pines, Petrov whispered, "We report this immediately. Headquarters must know. But first, we survive the night." The scouts nodded, each man feeling the weight of what they had discovered, a Nazi secret train carrying experiments so horrifying that it could alter the course of the war if unleashed. And in the stillness of the forest, the crates shifted once more, as if aware of the intruders, as if anticipating the chaos that would inevitably come. February 15, 1943. The night was bitter, a relentless cold that seemed to seep through the thickest wool coats and steel boots. The snow glittered faintly under the pale moonlight, turning the forest into a monochrome maze of shadows and silver. Lieutenant Ivan Petrov and his scouts had remained hidden near the Nazi train for hours, their breaths forming small clouds in the frigid air. The soldiers were exhausted, cold, and on edge, but none dared to speak above a whisper. Every sound could be their last. The sight of the train still haunted them. Crates containing shapes that were alive yet unnatural, armored cars, and strange devices the scouts couldn't identify. It was unlike anything they had encountered in the war. Petrov had spent the night trying to memorize the details, sketching rough diagrams in his notebook with trembling fingers. The shapes inside the crates were not only alive, they seemed intelligent, aware of their surroundings in a way that made the hair on his neck stand. "We can't leave without understanding this," Petrov whispered to Dmitri, who crouched beside him, eyes wide and filled with fear. "If this train reaches the front, who knows what they could unleash? We need details, exact details, and if possible, evidence." Dmitri swallowed hard. "Lieutenant, if we're discovered, they'll kill us all." Petrov nodded. "I know. That is why we move carefully. No noise, no mistakes." The scouts split into pairs again. Petrov led Dmitri and two others toward the flatbeds that contained the most visible crates. The snow muffled their steps, but not entirely. Every footfall required calculation. A misstep could send a cascade of snow tumbling down onto a metal surface, alerting the Germans. As they neared the train, Petrov motioned to stop. One of the crates had a small opening near the glass panel, as if someone had tampered with it. Through the faint light, Petrov could see the shapes inside writhing violently. The forms were humanoid, but grotesquely distorted, some limbs bent at impossible angles. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, with veins and metallic implants visible beneath. A low hiss emitted from one, sounding like a combination of breath and machine, a sound that made Dmitri's blood run cold. "By Comrade Stalin, what are they?" Dmitri breathed, his voice trembling. "We will find out." "Quietly," Petrov whispered. He motioned for two scouts to flank the rear of the flatbeds, hoping to find a hatch or opening that would allow them to peek inside without being seen. The two men crept silently, snow crunching faintly beneath their boots. Petrov and Dmitri inched closer to the front, using the armored cars for cover. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, every tree, every branch a potential observer. Suddenly, a shout rang out from the far side of the train. One of the German sentries had spotted movement, or perhaps heard something. Petrov's heart skipped a beat. He signaled for immediate silence. The men flattened themselves in the snow, hearts pounding. The sentry's flashlight swept across the train, illuminating the crates and their occupants. Petrov's breath caught in his throat. The pale shapes inside the glass panels reacted. They writhed violently, pressing against the walls, as if aware of the approaching human. The effect was terrifying. It was as though the cargo itself was alive and sentient, capable of sensing intruders. Petrov realized they had to act fast. If the Germans inspected the train closely, the scouts would be caught. He signaled to Dmitri to move forward to a small gap between two armored cars. Carefully, he pushed aside a tarp to peek inside. The sight made him stiffen. Rows of creatures, humanoid but horrific in appearance, were confined in crates designed to restrain them. Some had metallic devices attached to their limbs, others hissed and growled in a language neither human nor machine. Petrov lowered his head. "This is worse than we feared," he muttered. "These things, the Germans are experimenting on them. Weapons of war, or worse, they're planning to unleash them." Dmitri shivered. "Lieutenant, we should retreat." "No. We survive, yes, but we also report. We must document this." Petrov's voice was calm, but his mind raced. They needed photographs, sketches, and exact numbers, evidence to explain what the Germans were hiding. The rear scouts returned, whispering urgently. "A hatch, Lieutenant. An access hatch near the middle flatbed. Unguarded for now." Petrov motioned for them to move as one unit, crawling across the snow toward the hatch. Each step was a battle against fear and frostbite. Snow brushed their uniforms, and the cold burned exposed skin. Every sound, the wind, shifting metal, even the faint hissing from the crates, seemed amplified in the dead night. Reaching the hatch, Petrov slowly lifted the cover, careful to avoid noise. Inside was a narrow corridor between crates, dimly lit by lanterns that the Germans had left burning. The faint illumination revealed more horrifying details: chains, metallic restraints, and tubes connected to some of the creatures. They were being held in a way that suggested experimentation, testing, modification, or worse. Dmitri's stomach churned. "Lieutenant, they're alive, and they're suffering." Petrov placed a hand on his shoulder. "We take note. We take everything we can remember. No touching, no interference. We survive, and we report." Suddenly, a shadow moved at the far end of the corridor. Another sentry, making rounds. Petrov froze. The scouts had only seconds to hide. They pressed themselves against the crates, bodies shaking, snow muffling their forms. The sentry's flashlight swung dangerously close, illuminating one of the writhing forms inside a crate. The creature recoiled violently, hissing, almost as if aware of the human presence. Petrov's heart raced. If the sentry noticed the movement. A loud snap echoed, a branch under Dmitri's boot. The sentry froze, peering into the shadows. Petrov's mind raced. The soldiers could not fire. They were deep behind enemy lines and vastly outnumbered. The only option was patience. Holding their breath, the scouts waited for the sentry to move on. After several torturous seconds, the guard continued his patrol. Petrov signaled for the scouts to back away slowly. "We've seen enough for now. We document, memorize, and return to headquarters." "But," he hesitated, glancing at the writhing crates, "we cannot forget this. The Germans are creating something monstrous. We must survive, or this information dies with us." The scouts began their careful retreat, tracing their steps through the snow, hearts pounding, every nerve alert. Behind them, the crates shifted again, almost alive with anticipation. Petrov could feel it in his bones. The creatures inside were aware. The forest seemed alive, every shadow a silent witness. And somewhere, deep inside the armored cars, the German secrets waited, deadly, horrifying, and waiting to be unleashed. As dawn approached, the first pale light filtering through the trees illuminated the frozen landscape. Petrov and his scouts moved like ghosts, slipping silently through the forest, carrying with them knowledge that could shock the Red Army, and the world, if it ever reached command. But they knew one thing: they had only scratched the surface of the Nazis' hidden horrors. And whatever was inside those crates was far more terrifying than they could yet comprehend. The first light of dawn filtered through the dense pines, casting pale shadows across the snow-laden forest floor. Lieutenant Ivan Petrov and his scouts pressed forward cautiously, hearts still hammering from the night's near discovery. The memory of the writhing, unnatural forms inside the Nazi crates haunted them. Each had glimpsed shapes that defied logic, humanoid yet grotesquely altered, restrained yet aware. Their hissing, shifting, almost intelligent movements remained etched in every soldier's mind. Petrov signaled the unit to regroup behind a thick stand of firs. "We must report this," he whispered, exhaling in clouds of frost. "But first, we need more evidence. Headquarters will never believe sketches alone. We need numbers, details, anything to show the scale of this monstrosity." Private Dmitry Sokolov swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the train. "Lieutenant, those things, they looked at us. I think they know we're here." Petrov's jaw tightened. "That's exactly what I feared. Keep calm. Keep your distance. No noise, no mistakes." The scouts moved stealthily back toward the train, following the path they had memorized the previous night. Snow muffled their movements, but not entirely. Every step threatened to alert the sentries. Petrov led Dmitri to the edge of the flatbeds, carefully peering into one of the armored cars. The creatures inside reacted immediately. Some twisted violently, pressing against their restraints, their metallic implants catching the dim light. A guttural hiss echoed, metallic and alive, vibrating through the walls of the car. The scouts froze. It was as if the creatures could sense intruders, could read intention. Every instinct screamed that they were being observed by their prey. Suddenly, a sharp metallic clang echoed from the rear of the train. Petrov tensed, signaling for absolute silence. One of the sentries had discovered a displaced crate, perhaps caused by the previous night's shift of the creatures. The man's flashlight cut across the snow, illuminating the armored cars and the writhing forms inside. Petrov's mind raced. Retreating now would mean leaving the evidence undocumented, but advancing was suicide. He made a snap decision. We move quickly, quietly, and take what we can. Photographs, measurements, sketches, everything. Then we retreat. Follow my lead. The scouts obeyed, crawling along the snow, using trees and debris for cover. Dmitri's hands shook as he held the small camera Petrov had managed to acquire from headquarters. The shutter clicked softly as he captured the first images of the creatures behind the glass panels. Their faces twisted in agony or rage, limbs bent at impossible angles, eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Petrov whispered instructions. Focus on the crates, note the markings, and measure the number of cars. Count the sentries. Memorize every detail. As they worked, a sudden low roar erupted from inside one of the armored cars. The creature's movement intensified, their hissing louder and more violent. One pressed against the glass so forcefully that it cracked slightly, sending a cold shock down Dmitri's spine. Petrov gestured for everyone to retreat slightly, but the creatures were now clearly reacting to their presence, aware of them. A second sentry appeared, inspecting the flatbeds. The scouts froze, pressing themselves into the snow. The sentry's flashlight beams swept dangerously close to their hiding spot. One creature inside the crate let out a shriek, a sound that was neither fully human nor fully animal, and the sentry jumped back in alarm. Petrov knew they had to act fast before reinforcements arrived. He whispered, We take the most crucial evidence and move. Now. The scouts gathered sketches, notes, and photographs, working quickly. The creature's hissing and thrashing grew louder, almost coordinated, as if they were plotting, aware that intruders were meddling with their confinement. Petrov realized the danger. They were not just prisoners. They were sentient, dangerous, and extremely strong. Any misstep could trigger disaster. As they prepared to retreat, one of the crates shifted violently, breaking free of a loose strap. A pale arm shot out, metallic implants glinting in the dim light. Petrov fired a warning shot into the snow, startling the creature enough to pull it back inside, but the event left his men shaken. We are pushing our luck too far, Dmitri whispered, voice trembling. Petrov nodded grimly. Agreed. We have enough for intelligence purposes. Headquarters must know. But we cannot stop observing entirely. We must understand what they are before it's too late. The scouts began to withdraw, retracing their path through the forest. Every branch seemed to snap underfoot, every snow-laden pine threatening to betray them. Behind them, the creatures continued their violent thrashing. Petrov dared a glance backward. Through the dim light, he could see dozens of pale, twisted forms in the crates, their glowing eyes fixed in his direction. The realization struck him. The Nazis had created living weapons, hidden in plain sight, in the depths of the forest. By mid-morning, the scouts reached a ridge far enough from the train to feel momentarily safe. Petrov signaled for a halt. We've survived the first contact. But remember, these are not ordinary weapons. They are alive, aware, and lethal. We must report, and we must return with reinforcements. Otherwise, his voice trailed off, the unspoken fear hanging heavy in the air. Dmitri shivered. Lieutenant, they knew we were here. I swear it, they watched us, even before we touched the crates. Petrov looked back toward the dense pines, the shadowed train barely visible through the trees. Yes, and that is why we must hurry. Headquarters must see what we've seen. The war may depend on it. But one misstep. He let the sentence hang. The forest, filled with the creature's distant, unsettling hissing, seemed to echo his words. The scouts pressed onward, carrying the memory of what they had seen, a hidden Nazi train, crates containing living, twisted experiments, and the terrifying realization that the enemy had weapons beyond imagination. Whatever lay inside those armored cars was a threat not just to the Red Army, but potentially to the world if unleashed. And as they disappeared into the forest, Petrov could not shake the feeling that the creatures inside the train were watching, waiting, and biding their time. February 15, 1943, late morning, Belarusian forest. The forest seemed to hold its breath as Lieutenant Ivan Petrov and his scouts pressed onward. The air was bitter, cutting through their winter uniforms, but they dared not stop for warmth. Each man's mind was haunted by the images of the creatures they had glimpsed in the crates, the pale, twisted forms with metallic implants and glowing eyes, writhing as if aware of their presence. Every step towards safety felt like walking on the edge of a knife. Petrov signaled for the scouts to halt behind a stand of snow-laden pines. He crouched, whispering urgently, "We have the evidence, we've memorized the details. Now we leave. No mistakes. We cannot let the Germans or those things find us." Private Dmitry Sokolov shivered, his eyes darting nervously. "Lieutenant, do you think they're alive enough to follow us?" Petrov's jaw tightened. "If they could, they would. But we cannot worry about that. We move quietly and swiftly. Follow my lead." The scouts moved cautiously, avoiding patches of snow that might conceal ice-covered branches ready to snap. Every step brought them closer to the forest's edge, but danger lurked behind every tree. Petrov could feel the creature's presence in the subtle vibrations of the snow beneath them. Hissing and low guttural sounds drifted faintly from the train, carrying a chilling awareness. Suddenly, a distant shout shattered the tense silence. A German patrol had discovered the absence of one of their sentries. Petrov froze. "Down!" he hissed, pressing Dmitry and two others into the snow. The men flattened themselves against a fallen log as the patrol's boots crunched closer, rifles ready. Through the gloom, the scouts saw the patrol approach the flatbeds. One of the armored cars rattled violently. The creatures inside seemed to sense the Germans' attention, thrashing against their restraints. Hissing echoed through the forest like a living alarm, blending with the soldiers' frantic whispers. Petrov's mind raced. They had two options: retreat immediately into deeper forest, risking exposure to the creatures, or wait and slip past the patrol. He chose the latter. Motioning for the scouts to stay low, he crept along the snow, using the trees for cover. Every footstep was precise, calculated, and silent. Dmitry's hands shook as he held the camera tightly. "Lieutenant, I can hear them, the creatures." "Yes," Petrov whispered. "And that is why we must not run blindly. Stay calm, stay sharp." As they moved past the flatbeds, the crates reacted violently. One of the armored cars jolted, metal screeching against the rails. Petrov froze, his heart hammering in his chest. One creature's arm shot out from a crack, its pale fingers scraping the edge of the hatch. A guttural, almost human scream echoed through the forest. "Move!" Petrov hissed. The scouts scrambled, slipping and sliding through the snow, barely maintaining their footing. Behind them, the creatures continued their violent thrashing, hissing and screeching. Their movements were fast, intelligent, almost predatory. Petrov realized with a jolt that the train itself had become a trap, a living machine of terror. The German patrol had noticed the noise and were moving toward the source. Petrov led the scouts into a narrow ravine, using the terrain to shield themselves. Snow fell from the pines above, muffling the sound of their movements. The patrol's shouts grew fainter as the forest swallowed their voices, but the creatures' cries were louder, more desperate, almost furious. After an exhausting crawl, Petrov signaled a halt. The scouts huddled together, hearts pounding, lungs burning in the cold. They were far from safety, but they had survived the immediate threat. Petrov took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing mind. "We've documented what we could," he said. "We have photographs, sketches, and detailed notes. Headquarters must see this. But remember," he paused, eyes scanning the snow-dusted trees. "Those creatures are alive. Intelligent. Dangerous. If the train moves, if the Germans release them, the consequences are unimaginable." Dmitry swallowed hard, his face pale. Lieutenant, do we report this now? Or do we try to stop the train? Petrov shook his head. We are not equipped to stop it. Our mission is reconnaissance. Survival. Reporting. That is all we can do. But we must survive to deliver this intelligence, or none of this matters. The scouts moved carefully through the forest, retracing their path toward friendly lines. Every tree and shadow seemed to harbor danger, every crunch of snow a potential alarm. Petrov's mind replayed every detail of the train, the crates, the shapes within, and the hissing, almost sentient presence of the creatures. Hours passed, and the forest began to thin. Dawn's first light broke through the pines, illuminating a path that would eventually lead them back to the Red Army's positions. Yet even in the pale light, Petrov could feel eyes, or something like eyes, watching from the distance. The creatures were aware. They had sensed the scouts' intrusion, and now, deep in the Belarusian forest, something stirred in response. By midday, the scouts had reached a safer area. Exhausted, freezing, and shaken, they paused to rest briefly, knowing the danger was not over. Petrov's thoughts were heavy with responsibility. The creatures, the train, and the Germans' experiments represented a threat beyond comprehension. Their mission was clear: survive, report, and ensure that the Red Army could prepare for whatever horrors the Nazis had unleashed. Yet, even as they trudged forward, Petrov could not shake the image of the crates, the twisted forms, and the guttural hissing. The forest felt alive with menace. He knew, deep in his heart, that the threat had not been neutralized. Whatever the Germans were hiding, it would not remain confined for long. And somewhere, deep among the pines, the train sat silent, but alive, waiting and aware. February 16, 1943, afternoon, Red Army Outpost, Belarus. The journey back to friendly lines had been grueling. Lieutenant Ivan Petrov and his scouts had traveled through the thickest sections of the Belarusian forest, navigating snowdrifts, frozen streams, and treacherous terrain. Their bodies were numb from cold, their minds haunted by the vision of the hidden Nazi train and its cargo of twisted, living experiments. Every step forward was weighed with the fear that the creatures, somehow aware and intelligent, might be pursuing them even now. By mid-afternoon, they finally reached the small Red Army outpost. Smoke rose from a wood-burning stove inside the command tent, carrying the faint scent of boiled potatoes and salted meat. Soldiers and officers bustled around, unaware of the horrors Petrov and his scouts had witnessed. Petrov stepped forward, his face pale and drawn, clutching the notebook filled with sketches, measurements, and frantic notes from the night of discovery. Dmitri held the camera, its rolls of film trembling in his frozen fingers. Captain Sergei Ivanov, the commanding officer, looked up with surprise. "Petrov! You're back early. Any news from behind enemy lines?" Petrov's voice was low, urgent. "Captain, what we've found, it is worse than anyone could imagine. The Germans, they have a train hidden deep in the forest. And it carries living experiments. Monstrous creatures, restrained, but intelligent. We saw them. They are aware, capable of violence, and terrifying." The room fell silent. Officers exchanged skeptical glances. "Living experiments?" Sergei asked, his brow furrowed. "Are you saying these are weapons of war?" Petrov nodded grimly. "Yes, sir. Not artillery. Not tanks. Something far more dangerous. They are alive, restrained in crates, hissing, writhing. The Germans are testing them, creating weapons that can think, react, and kill. We have sketches, notes, photographs. But we barely escaped with our lives." A junior officer muttered under his breath. This sounds impossible." Petrov ignored him, unfolding his sketches on a nearby table. Detailed diagrams showed the crates, the layout of the train, and the devices attached to the creatures. "We counted the number of cars, the types of cargo, and the markings on each crate. Headquarters must know. This train cannot reach the front lines. If it does, entire battalions could be annihilated without warning. These creatures are designed to kill." Captain Ivanov leaned forward, his face pale. "Show me the photographs," Dmitri handed over the camera. The first images flashed onto the small darkroom screen: pale, humanoid forms with metallic implants, writhing inside crates, eyes glowing faintly, hissing in confined fury. Even the most hardened officers recoiled. The photographs confirmed what Petrov had described. This is beyond comprehension," Ivanov muttered. "We have heard rumors of secret experiments, but this is monstrous. The Nazis have crossed the line." Petrov nodded. "And they are not finished. The train is mobile. The creatures are alive. If released, they could decimate entire units before anyone can react. We need immediate action. We must intercept the train, neutralize the cargo, or at least contain it. Otherwise," he let the threat hang in the freezing air. Orders were sent immediately to nearby divisions, detailing the location of the train and its contents. Reconnaissance aircraft were scrambled, and specialized units were briefed to prepare for a potential biological and mechanical threat. The sense of urgency in the outpost was palpable. Soldiers moved quickly, preparing for a mission unlike any they had encountered before. As Petrov and his scouts debriefed, Dmitri asked quietly, "Lieutenant, do you think we made it out alive because they let us? Or because they wanted us to see?" Petrov stared into the snow-covered forest visible from the outpost window. "I don't know," he admitted. "But one thing is certain: whatever is in that train, it is aware. It senses, it reacts, it waits. And if the Germans lose control, no one will be safe. Not in this forest, not anywhere near the front." The scouts remained in the outpost overnight, exhausted, haunted by visions of the creatures. Sleep was elusive. Every rustle in the trees outside the tent sounded like hissing, every shadow like a writhing arm pressing against the crates. Petrov wondered how far the Germans had gone with their experiments, how many other trains, how many other hidden laboratories lay in forests, abandoned towns, or secret bunkers. By morning, a special task force had been assembled, moving quickly toward the coordinates Petrov had provided. The forest awaited, silent and menacing. The train, concealed under snow and camouflage tarps, held its deadly cargo, and deep within its armored cars, the creatures shifted, aware, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. Petrov and his scouts were given orders to accompany the task force, but at a safe distance. They had seen enough, survived enough, to know that direct engagement was suicide. The creatures were unpredictable, intelligent, and lethal. Yet Petrov could not shake a gnawing fear. Even if the Nazis were defeated tomorrow, the knowledge of this train and its contents would haunt him for the rest of his life. As they approached the forest, a faint hiss echoed through the trees. Petrov froze, scanning the snow and the dense pines. The creatures inside the crates were awake, aware of the approaching forces, and ready. Whatever horrors had been hidden within the Nazi train were about to be unleashed, and the world had no idea of the nightmare that awaited. The forest seemed to close in around them, alive with menace. Petrov whispered to his men, "Prepare yourselves. The war has already changed. And we are only beginning to see the true extent of its horrors." And somewhere deep within the camouflage train, the crates shifted violently, hissing in anticipation. The creatures were ready, and the battle that awaited would test the limits of courage, intelligence, and survival.